Being with us Friday night, live from Net TV Studios, our Current Affairs program. We're joined by the Honourable Dr. Francis Zammit Dimech. Good evening, Dr. Zammit Dimech.
Good evening to you, Leah, and good evening to all persons who are following us on net television.
Thank you for being with us. I'd like to refer, and thank you for breaking your weekend, because I know you were on holiday. I'd like to refer to...
Not quite holiday at the moment, but anyway, yes. Anyway, some time off, but it's a pleasure for me to be on the program.
Thank you very much, for us too. I'd like to refer to the public inquiry of the assassination of Daphne Caruana Galizia and some comments which we've seen over the last 2 weeks. The first being, I quote, Minister Edward Scicluna. If he had not voted to retain Conrad Mitzi, he would have had to resign. This did not seem fair, as he had left a comfortable job in Brussels. That's the first one. And then I refer also to Minister Evarist Bartolo, who says he did not want to end up hung and burned. Dr. Zammit Dimech, what are your comments about what we're seeing from government ministers?
Well, what strikes me most is that suddenly government ministers are picking up courage, which they certainly did not display before. In particular, with reference to Minister Edward Scicluna, because he went to the public inquiry, and as he has been reported, he very clearly distanced himself from the former Prime Minister, Joseph Muscat. He distanced himself from Keith Schembri, Chief of Staff of the former Prime Minister, and also from former Minister and former Deputy Leader of the Labour Party for some time, Conrad Mitzi. And he said that, and he said it loud and clear, and he also referred in the public inquiry to what in fact was known as the Kitchen Cabinet led by Joseph Muscat. I mean, the term Kitchen Cabinet is used in political and public life. It's, in other words, that innermost core of people who are making fundamental decisions. In this case, even decisions relating to major contracts relating to electoral gas or major contracts relating to other sectors of the economy. Right. And the Minister of Finance is now speaking about it, and you could say he's speaking about it rather clearly. But why did he not do anything before? Why did he not do anything when he formed part of the cabinet led by Joseph Muscat? In other words, he carried, as he still carries, collective responsibility. Sure. You referred me also to the comments by Evarist Bartolo. To his credit, Evarist Bartolo did occasionally make some comments even before, even in other words, during the tenure of Joseph Muscat as Prime Minister. He seems to be pitching a bit louder now, but he did make some comments and some, especially on social media before. Mm-hmm. And as we saw in the comment that you displayed, had people like Edward Scicluna, like Evarist Bartolo and others stood up for good governance, stood up for what is right, stood up for transparency, stood up against corruption, stood up against criminality, even in the very corridors of the highest seat of government, then possibly the country would not be in the present mess it is in now. So that would be my comment. It is so easy for people to make comments against the person they served as former Prime Minister when that person is no longer Prime Minister. But that, to me, hardly displays courage. That, to me, displays the total absence of courage. And I'm trying to be rather polite in the choice of my words. Sure. And it can also display a degree of complicity. And the fact that he knew that things were wrong and did nothing about it, well, that, I think, goes a long way to sum up what was happening, and in my opinion, to what some extent is still happening, because we will only have closure on the kind of criminality which was being coordinated at the highest levels of authority in this country when the police will arraign the people responsible, when we will see justice really being done. And I'm still waiting, and the country is still waiting. So that's my reaction to your question.
If I go back to the times they were referring, when, I feel, do you think that they felt threatened?
Did they feel threatened? Possibly, possibly. And again, people need to display courage even when they feel threatened. You are talking of people with high profiles, and people who, if they had spoken out even more clearly, I think that would have itself served as pressure against whoever would have been threatening them. When we serve in public office, we need to rise up to what we believe in, even if threats are being made, whether directly or indirectly. Probably there would have certainly been the implication, and this is what Evarist Bartolo would have probably implied by the expression, I would have been banned, right? In other words, they were probably told, or in any case, somebody would have hinted to them, or they understood from circumstances, because even now they are not being totally clear, that their political career is at stake. I think politicians need to understand in general that what is at stake above career is reputation. What is at stake is doing the right thing above being simply complacent and simply remaining there, just not to knock any boat. That should be the standard in politics. It's not an easy standard, but the more we will have people in the political class standing up for the values I am referring to, then the more we would be honoring our oath of office as ministers, people who are ministers, or people who are in parliament. Their oath of office is ultimately loyalty to the country, loyalty to the people. That is, in my opinion, the ultimate test, and that should be the measure of how we act, of how we behave. The fact that people let us down leads to consequences.
Sure. And hypothetically speaking, if we are looking for a scenario with good governance and something like that comes up again, how should they act as government ministers at the time, not after?
I think as government ministers, they should make the position most clear within cabinet, first and foremost, and state there that they would not simply remain serving as government ministers if the situation is not corrected immediately.
Thank you very much.
They can go public, and then they can, as we see ministers do in other European countries, in other democratic European countries. If it reaches a point where their own reputation, where their own conscience is being compromised, well, they would be better off to resign and go public and state why they are going public and why they cannot tolerate the situation anymore. Remaining simply part of the pack, in my opinion, is a form of weakness, is a form of complicity, is a form of disservice to the people, and is a form of helping those with the worst criminal intent, and I use the word intended to mean criminal, so because there is no other way to describe corruption apart from other criminal activity carried out with the complicity of people in the highest office. So they need to stand apart. Otherwise, they are in breach of what they owe the people as a whole. So that is the morale of the story. And they also need to ensure that the structures are working correctly. If I refer again to the Minister of Finance in particular, I mean, the Minister of Finance has even specific responsibilities relating to procurement. He cannot simply say, well, the procedures are being bypassed because the office of the Prime Minister is directing otherwise. The Minister of Finance is supposed to be stating there are procurement rules for which I am responsible as minister, and I shall not allow those rules to be bypassed simply because you are telling me you are using a different procedure. The Minister of Finance is also there to ensure that structures that relate to the ministry, including a structure such as FIAU, which is the Financial Intelligence Analysis Unit, to make sure that it's functioning, that its officers are protected, that we are not seeing resignations of people when their reports are presented to the police and the police are not acting upon those reports.
Thank
if
you.
these people don't feel the comfort of support from the minister who is there to support them, then that leads to a total collapse. And the total collapse will ultimately have an impact on all of us. Because now we are in fear of what will be the report in what regard when it comes to the Manival report. Now we are in fear of whether we are complying or not with all the recommendations of the Venice Commission and whether recent amendments go far enough to implement what has been requested of Malta. And what is real fear? The real fear is not one of what will be in one report or another. The real fear is, are the jobs of people working, especially in financial services, being protected? Or are many of those jobs at risk?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Are we attracting investment to our country?
Thank
or are
you.
we scaring investors away?
Thank you, Dr. Francis Zammit Dimech. Thank you. You've been very thorough. I thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, and I thank you as well.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Good evening. Good evening. I'm now with